Bloomberg Audio Studios. Podcasts, radio, news.
Welcome to the Merryn Talks Money weekly roundup, our debrief on the biggest stories in markets and economics. I'm Merryn Somerset Webb, editor-at-large for Bloomberg UK Wealth.
And I'm John Stepek, author of the Money Distilled newsletter and senior reporter for Bloomberg.
Excellent. John, you're Scottish.
Yes.
Obviously.
How can you tell?
I don't know. And you said to me the other day that I was the token Scot in the room, but kind of I'm not. You're the actual Scot in the room. So you will have noticed that a court has just ruled that the consent for 2 new Scottish oil and gas fields have been granted unlawfully, and their owners must seek fresh approval from the UK government before production can begin. And I thought I would just mention that because we're going to talk about a couple of things today. And the first thing we're going to talk about is Rachel Reeves and her drive for growth, because it is her mission, her drive for growth. And then we're going to talk about DeepSeek and the US stock market and AI a little bit. But I just thought a fabulous introduction to talking about who we now call poor Rachel Reeves is this fact that every way a government turns, there's a court there, often with Greenpeace behind it, say, actually, no, you can't. And do you remember poor Rachel last week? She said, the answer can't always be no. She said that in Davos, didn't she? Well, you know what, Rachel? The answer always is no. What's she going to do about it? What is she going to do about it, John?
Normally, I would feel that it's not necessarily a good thing to have a lawyer as a Prime Minister, but I'm starting to feel that maybe that is the kind of one bright spot about Keir Starmer being the Prime Minister. It's like the level of, I mean, people call it judicial activism, and I get that, but the only reason that this stuff can happen is because a politician passed a law at some point in the past that none of us quite noticed the repercussions of at the time. So we do need to do something about this. It shouldn't really be up to a small pressure group bringing a fringe kind of case that can then shut down something that the democratically elected government has already approved. This isn't okay. Actually, the courts have gone too far. There's a lot of examples of this sort of stuff, and it needs to stop. Unfortunately, I am not a lawyer, nor a politician, nor someone who is deep in the weeds on this stuff. So I don't know how this has come about, but we need to get rid of it. It just needs to end because it's not acceptable to have this kind of thing continuously stopping us from getting anything done.
It's absurd. And when you look at the, I'm just going to say before we start here, hate mail directly to John, not me. Right, because he's Scottish, so probably he was the one who wanted these oil fields in the first place, not me.
Exactly.
Nothing to do with me. But yes, but the cases, we talked about Aberdeen last week, didn't we? But the cases were bought by two environmental campaigning groups, so Greenpeace obviously, and another one called Uplift. And I haven't done this yet, but I'm pretty sure that if we check where the cash that goes to Uplift and Greenpeace comes from, we'll find that quite a lot of it comes one way or another via our tax contributions. So we are caught in this ridiculous situation where time after time after time, you find the government thwarted by government/taxpayer financed organizations. And this is what we have here. So a 57-page judgment where the judge said there's a public interest in having the decision remade on a lawful basis because of the effects of climate change, which he said outweighed the interests of developers. Of course, you know, maybe something like this, the Rosebank oil field and the Jackdaw gas field. Rosebank is a bit north of Shetland and Jackdaw is a bit east of Aberdeen. I would say this isn't just about the interests of the developers, it's about the interests of the ordinary population of the UK and their living standards. But hey, that's just me. Anyway, on to Rachel Reeves and all the other things that she isn't going to be able to get done. There's the Heathrow runway, right?
Yeah, I mean, if you can't get a couple of oil fields opened, then I do wonder. I mean, Rachel Reeves was actually on Bloomberg Telly, and she said that she wants spades to be in the ground by the end of this Parliament. And I mean, in normal circumstances, tell me that you're going to start on an extension in 4 years' time would seem like a long time, but that seems miraculously fast for, you know, an extra kind of runway that's already been delayed by, you know, countless times over various legal challenges. And, and obviously you've already got Sadiq Khan saying that he's definitely going to take it to court. So I am going to be interested to see how this happens.
He's going to take it to court. He's going to take it to court. And he's going to use climate change legislation, net zero, all that stuff. And he's going to have Greenpeace and Uplift with him. And once again, this is how lawfare is used in the UK to thwart the government.
I mean, let's say one thing that I am interested in, and obviously I've made an awful lot of criticisms of the government and the decisions that it's made, but I am curious to see if someone who is as presumably versed in lawfare and this way of doing things as Keir Starmer presumably is, has got a way to counteract it now that he's the one that's, taking the flak from it. I am hoping that if nothing else comes about, we'll see a pushback against this, basically governance via the courts. But you're right, the other thing, and also get rid of gift aid. Gift aid needs to stop. Right? All of this kind of...
Yep, get rid of gift aid.
Get rid of gift aid. You've been saying it for ages. Anything, any grant to any charity should be, much more transparent. I mean, in an ideal world, I would say don't give any taxpayer money to charities at all, or have a referendum every single time a grant is handed out, and 50% of the population has to be for it, or something like that, because this is just going beyond a joke.
No grants to charities of any kind out of taxpayer money. The government should do what the government should do, and charities are outside the government, and I'm not sure that any of them, be it Squirrels or Greenpeace, should be financed by government, by taxpayer. The government should, fulfill its democratic mandate, which is to do what the population wants, not to give money to organisations that are doing things that the population might not necessarily want. Which brings me very neatly to something that I've been looking at this week. Actually, we haven't really finished on growth. We'll come back to growth, but this is connected. Over half of Gen Z, I can never remember which gen is which, but let's say young people, over half of Gen Z wants the UK to become a dictatorship. Now, why do they want the UK to become a dictatorship? There's all sorts of theories out there, but I can answer that for you. It's because they would like to see something, just something, anything get done. And they see the electorate going out there and voting again and again and again. Build stuff, do stuff, make a smaller state, have lower taxes, reduce immigration, whatever it is people vote for over and over. And these things never happen. Nothing anybody votes for ever happens. So they think to themselves, well, if anything's ever going to get done, maybe we should just have a dictator. Hey, maybe the stuff that gets done won't be what we want, but something will happen. I mean, do you think that's it?
I mean, there's probably an element of them wanting a bit of drama in their lives, but I mean, obviously, with all of these surveys, I'd take them with a massive pinch of salt, because I don't think that most. I mean, Generation Z, this is the generation that's actually older than our kids, but younger than the millennials. So I don't know, 20s.
Oh, they're the really difficult ones, aren't they?
Yeah,
really
they're kind of yeah. I mean, the other interesting things. I mean, maybe it's just not true, but people say about young people being more left wing. They just want the opposite of what they've got now.
Well, it depends whether they want a communist dictator or a right-wing dictator. I mean, no one said to them when they said they wanted a dictator. No one said did they want a fascist or a communist. I mean, they didn't get the right choices, I guess. So we don't know whether they're extreme left or extreme right, or if they yet know that extreme left and extreme right are the same thing. Maybe they don't know that yet, the young.
They might not, and also, I don't know, they've got a lot of, I'm not sure that I'm not sure left and right make a lot of sense anymore. I think whenever I think about all of the things that are going on, you can basically split it into people who are still pro something resembling progress and a kind of degrowth, anti-growth nihilism on the other side, and those two things. And I think that then makes a little bit more sense of the voting for a dictatorship element, because that's quite a nihilistic way to look at things, or nihilistic. I'm never quite sure how you pronounce that. So I think that then makes more sense than them thinking about. I don't think they're thinking, I want a Stalin or I want a Hitler. They're thinking, I want somebody who's going to set my enemies, whoever they are, straight. If you see what I mean. I mean, they want a dictator who's on their side.
Yeah, I suspect it's more about, or it's a lot about, that absolute lack of growth over the last couple of decades. So you have an entire generation here that have never really experienced the growth, the innovation, the creativity, etc., that leads to sustained economic growth that you and I saw when we were young. So we maybe have more of a growth mindset, as they now say in the schools, growth mindset, an idea that growth is the default, that it's possible, that it should be there, that things should be improving and getting better all the time, and therefore the idea that wealth should constantly be redistributed isn't necessary because the pie is growing. Whereas if you are perhaps Generation Z, your default belief, which is entirely reasonable, is that the pie isn't growing, and crucially, that particularly with poor Rachel in charge, it isn't going to grow. So what you need is a more extreme level of redistribution than democracy will allow. So if you don't get growth and you don't get living standards growing again, what is it that you would expect, except for maybe this?
Yeah, I mean, that's really true. And I do forget that we grew up in the 90s, and the 90s were very much everything did keep getting better, particularly at a geopolitical level. We had
great jobs. We could, we were educated for free. We had great jobs. We could afford houses. We have children. We had them at a reasonable age, et cetera, et cetera. A lot of the things that people stuck in a no growth mindset and a no growth assumption find very hard to think that they will ever have. So I totally understand this, but I've gone off topic again. This is not that kind of podcast. So let's. I think we've talked quite a lot in the past on this podcast about what Rachel Reeves could do to allow growth rather than to pretend that she can create growth. So I would suggest that anyone who wants to hear a little more about that goes back to the podcast that we did with Simon French, which was excellent on all that. The main thing being that if Rachel Reeves believes that growth is a fight, she's fighting the wrong thing. She doesn't need to fight. She needs to get out of the way. Less fighting, unless, of course, you are fighting the cause, which she's going to be doing for a while. On to something, John, on to something that you've written about a lot this week and which we already released what we don't call an emergency podcast, but we call an early podcast on Tuesday. AI, DeepSeek, and the effect on the US technology sector. Are you in the camp that says DeepSeek, it's great, everything just gets better for US tech as a result of DeepSeek and we should all buy more and more NVIDIA? Or are you in the camp that says, oh, look, China won, this stuff can be done cheaply and easily with low energy, therefore no one wants own NVIDIA chips anymore. It's all over for them, and it's all over everyone who spent billions and billions and billions on building or attempting to build an AI infrastructure that doesn't look like it's already needed. Oh, and goodbye nuclear energy at the same time. Or you could be somewhere in the middle, I guess, but those are the two camps, right?
I don't think I'm in either camp, and I think the only camp I'm actually in is more that this has reminded people that unexpected stuff throws spanners in the works all the time. And the fundamental problem here has been the AI bubble, if you like, let's call it the AI bubble, has been massively overinflated. So stocks are very overvalued compared to anything but the most perfect event unfolding. And the one thing that DeepSeek shows is that you don't know the future path, so you can't assume that it's going to be perfect, and you can't assume that NVIDIA is going to be the only contender for the rest of eternity. And therefore, probably there should be a little more room for uncertainty in the price, which means that the current price, or the price a couple of days ago, was probably not the right price. And I think that's about the only useful thing that, especially, a non-specialist like me, but even, the specialists, unfortunately, if you're a non-specialist, you don't know the details of what you're talking about, but if you're a specialist, you're far too into the details to be able to give a decent big picture outlook. So I think that, I think that's it. I think all we knew before for almost sure was that these stocks were overvalued, and this is a reminder of why they were overvalued. It's because they were pricing in perfection rather than anything else.
My takes would be that one exactly. Never pay for perfect because you're never going to get perfect. And, the dynamic of all of history is that some technology that looks expensive and difficult is always disrupted by someone who can do it at a fraction of the cost with a fraction of the effort. Happens every single time. That would be my first takeaway. The second one would be the weirdness of, I don't know, when you and I were reading all the stuff about Davos, where we weren't, by the way, a lot of the talk at Davos was about DeepSeek. right? This wasn't new information. It'd been out there before, but it only hit the stock market on Monday. I thought it was really interesting because everyone's always talking about how the market gets hold of information before anybody else, and it's a perfect weighing machine, et cetera, et cetera. But actually, it was a long time in market terms for the information about DeepSeek and what it could do and how it had been trained to do it to move from Davos chatter to the market. Your information doesn't matter until suddenly it really matters. That's also, I thought, very interesting.
Yeah,
And the third
that was
point
really interesting, actually.
is that,
Aye.
yeah, that from the non-expert point of view, cheap AI might not be good for big tech and might not be good for anyone who's just promised to chuck $100 billion into Donald Trump's AI infrastructure ideas. Maybe not good for that, but really good surely for productivity across the board, which brings us back to poor Rachel Reeves and her desperation to create growth. But she might not necessarily have to do that. Well, she can't do that, but she might be able to step back and just say, well, hang on, if cheap AI is out there, and it's going to make its way around the economy without her having to do anything, that could be, conceivably, a huge, cheap productivity boost that will give us growth anyway. Not just here, but in the US, of course, as well. And then we have the classic situation where you have a bubble, massive capex bubble. You have the creation of a technology of some kind or another. You have a productivity boom, but you don't actually see any profitability to the big companies who may have developed the technology in the first place for a good decade. Like the internet. Like railways, all this kind of thing. I'm amusing myself at the moment, John, looking at mini bubbles. And, the AI bubble fits perfectly into the dynamic of a mini bubble. Right, a sector bubble inside a market.
Yeah. No, I mean, it's one of those, it's like a productive bubble. So like the internet ultimately was a productive bubble. And when it burst, it actually didn't cause that much damage. It's only when you've got stuff like property that you've got a real problem. But yeah, no, I mean, the AI thing I do find fascinating. And you're right. I mean, obviously, if they've found a way to do ChatGPT, but 100-fold cheaper, then that's great. That's that's fantastic. It's very hard to say that's a bad thing. Going back to Rachel Reeves and growth, the one issue that I have, and just to be clear, I am not an AI skeptic. I can see that it's useful for stuff. But the sorts of things that it would be really useful for, the kind of, AI in medicine, AI in law, I can see that sort of stuff being kind of held up by, the guilds, if you like, in those areas, the human element rather than the technological element. And I think that is, again, that sort of is a little bit like what we've been talking about earlier, the kind of battle against the courts to actually get anything done. It's not that we can't do any of this stuff. It's that, if you like, the kind of social structures around them are stopping us. So highly qualified lawyers and highly qualified doctors aren't going to want to introduce, kind of AI into their workflow for the same reason that printers back when the printing unions were around didn't want desktop publishing software coming in. And getting over that is going to be difficult, I think. Maybe I'm wrong.
Yeah, you're just a misery guts. I'm much more optimistic about it.
It's true.
I think AI is one of those things that can kind of, creep through the system without sort of being noticed in quite that way. But we will see. As we say, neither of us are proper experts here. Anyway, I want to go back, if you don't mind, to mini bubbles, sector bubbles inside markets. Okay. And obviously we've collected a lot over the years, the Great Diving Bell bubble and, all that kind of thing. I've got a new one I've been looking at, which was the listed nursing home company bubble. The Fevered 50, they were called. That was a bubble in the late 60s and early 70s.
Wow.
And they, obviously, there was all sorts of regulatory change that meant that people started manically building nursing homes and they would list them before they'd finished the construction, all that kind of thing. There were there were only a couple listed in 1966. By 1970, there were 90. And then suddenly the bottom fell out completely in 1971. There was a big fraud case. Of course, there's always a big fraud case. And that meant that everyone started going, whoa, you can't return us 20% a year when you've got that much debt and you haven't even built the nursing home yet. Over the collapse. Anyway, I was talking to someone about this the other day, and he said to me, had I ever heard of the great cryonics bubble, the cryogenics bubble?
Oh, come on.
Yeah. And I cannot find anything about this on the internet anywhere, not even with a little use of AI. So this is a call out to our listeners. Does anybody know anything about the cryonics bubble or the cryogenics bubble, depending on what you call it, which I understand happened in the early 80s when there was a great boom in the technology of freezing people's heads or freezing people's bodies to wake them up later, and various scandals where bodies turned out not to have been frozen after all, people turning the electricity off at night, this kind of thing. And then this mini bubble crash, but I can find nothing about it. Anybody knows anything about this bubble, or indeed has another favorite mini bubble they'd like to tell us about, please do get in touch.
Was that in the
John?
US?
Yeah.
That's really interesting. I had no idea.
Yes. It's really interesting, but I have asked our two favorite financial historians. I've asked Russell Napier and I've asked Eddie Chancellor. I've asked both of them if they know of the freezing people's bodies bubble. And neither of them do.
Russell
so as I
doesn't know
say,
about it. This is a chance for someone to
exactly.
come up with a scoop. I mean, that would have to end up. We could have somebody's head in the Library of Mistakes. That would be great. Defrosted.
That's not where I was expecting the conversation to go. But yes, we could indeed have a defrosted body in the Library of Mistakes. I mean, the problem, John, of course, as you know, the reason why all these companies go wrong is because it's really, really expensive to keep bodies frozen at an appropriate level so that you can bring them back to life later. It's very expensive. Very high fixed costs.
Things, yeah, exactly. Where's your you're not getting brilliant cash flows from that business either.
Well, each body needs a permanent portfolio with it, right? So every time you take a body, it's a bit like giving a house to the National Trust in the old days, right? You hand it over and you have to give a portfolio for its upkeep at the same time.
You know what? It would be like a defined benefit pension scheme.
Exactly. So if you were to be a successful cryonics company, which clearly none of them were, you would also have to be a very expert manager of a permanent portfolio. And I'm guessing that these two skills don't normally go together. I think we need to end this podcast.
No, I'm just thinking there's an opportunity here. Like, active managers, I know the ESG is kind of going away now, but this is your chance. Kind of like deep freeze your clients. The cryogenic portfolio. So there's something going on here.
I think we'll come back to this one. Let's see if we can find a couple of fund managers who would tell us how they would run a permanent portfolio designed to finance the cost of keeping the original client's body frozen indefinitely. Anyone who'd like to be on that pod, also do get in touch. Thanks for listening to this week's Merryn Talks Money debrief. If you like our show, rate, review and subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts. Also be sure to follow me and John on X or Twitter at MerrynSW and John_Stepek. This episode was produced by Summer Sadi and Moses Andam. Brendan Francis Newnham is our executive producer. Question and comments on this show, and I think there might be a lot. And all our shows always welcome. Our show email is merrynmoney@bloomberg.net.